those who assume being emperor is a life of calm and luxury, Julian's life is the exact opposite. Disaster after disaster. Some backstory: it was the reign of Constantius II, a man who ruled with an iron fist from 337 to 361. He was one of the late Constantine's children who also happened to be Julian's cousin. During this time, Julian saw multiple members of his family assassinated for political gain. After a path was cleared, Constantius II and his two brothers, Constantine II and Constans I, became co-emperors, with each ruling a portion of the vast Roman Empire. During this arrangement, Julian and his stepbrother Gallus were exiled from Rome, sent to Bithynia, Nicomedia, and then Cappadocia to receive a Christian education. In 340, Constantine II lost his life to Constans I, who also died a little over 10 years later after fighting against Magnentius, a pretender to the throne. As the last living emperor, Constantius II became extremely paranoid. Fearful for his life, he gave Gallus control over the eastern part of the empire while he dealt with Magnentius. However, Gallus was publicly executed in 354 because of his tyranny. With no one left, Julian was appointed Caesar over the west, with Constantius moving back to the east to suppress the rebellion. In 357, Constantius II ordered Julian to start a conquest into Germania. Amassing a force of 13,000 Gallic troops, Julian marched eastward to link up with the 25,000 other troops under the command of Barbado and Milan. However, he was delayed by an attack by the Latian tribes, so Barbado pulled out of Germania because he was too deep behind enemy lines with no signs of reinforcement. Now that Barbado had pulled out, the Germanic Alemanni king, Cnodomerius, focused all of his attention on the vastly outnumbered Julian. Julian and Cnodomerius met on the field of battle at Strasbourg. Julian suffered multiple initial defeats, which caused his armored cavalry to rout. However, Cnodomerius failed to capitalize on these losses, so Julian was able to prevent his men from being surrounded. The Alemanni tried to push the Roman center, however this backfired and Julian led a counterattack that surrounded the Alemanni in a crescent formation. This caused Cnodomerius' forces to panic and attempt to retreat, but the Romans chased them, causing many Alemanni to drown in the Rhine River from the sheer weight of their armor. Cnodomerius was sent as a trophy to Constantius II, which cemented Roman military dominance in Western Europe. However, trouble continued to brew in the east. The armies of the Shahanshah, meaning King of Kings, Shapur II, had ambushed Roman forces in the east, and in 360 they captured the cities of Amida, Usa, Rema, Singara, and Bizabde. Constantius II tried to recapture Bizabde, but he was repelled by the Sassanians, forcing him to retreat to Antioch. As Rome took heavy losses, Constantius II asked Julian to send him half of his Gallic forces. However, this order was sent to Julian's commanders instead of Julian, and so it was ignored. Even more catastrophic, in 360, Julian's armies had declared himself Augustus over the entire empire in Lutetia, which is modern-day Paris. Instead of coming to the assistance of his cousin, Julian continued to wage war in Germania and defeated yet another king, Vadomarius. As news of this reached Constantius II, Rome was dangerously close to civil war. Julian spread his loyalists across the west, and Constantius began to spread his forces across the east. However, this disaster was avoided as Constantius II died in 361 and named Julian his successor in his will. This saved the legions from splitting into factions. As emperor, Julian's first edict was returning the empire to its pagan roots. He renounced Christianity in favor of polytheistic cults dedicated to gods like Mithras, the Persian god of war, which is why he was named the Apostate by Christians, or the Rejecter. Now that the backstory is out of the way, we get to the present. It was the spring of 363, Julian was entering his third year as emperor. He was eager to prove himself. An enormous Roman army under his command left Antioch. Julian had the same ambitions as the Romans that had come before him, which was to finally defeat their Persian nemesis and bring them to their knees like Alexander of Macedon had done more than half a millennia prior. Julian's army was seasoned in the field of battle and was under the command of many veteran officers. Alongside this, he had formed an alliance with the Kingdom of Armenia to the north of the Sassanians, as Shapur was still recovering from a recent war. Julian needed this victory to confirm his legitimacy. Despite Constantius II naming Julian his successor, the nation was still splintered because of Julian's paganism, which angered many Christian communities. Things escalated when the Temple of Apollo at Daphne burned down and Julian blamed the Christians, closing their major churches. Aside from legitimizing his rule, defeating the Sassanians was necessary to start the border conflicts on the Persian border and stabilize the eastern region. More importantly, if Shapur was defeated, Julian could let Hormisdas, Shapur's exiled brother, govern Persia as a proxy. They faced little resistance, which allowed them to ravage many major cities. For example, despite the island town of Anatha surrendering, the Romans burnt it down. Likewise, the second largest city of Mesopotamia, Pirisabora, surrendered after 2 days of siege, but they still destroyed it. The capture of this city allowed the Romans to utilize the Royal Canal to move their fleets from the Euphrates to the Tigris River. The Persians, seeing how far Julian was advancing, began to flood the lowlands, forcing the Romans to rely on pontoon bridges for navigation. While advancing, the Romans besieged the city of Myos-Malaka, the last thing in their way of the Sassanians' royal capital, Ctesiphon. At this point, Julian's army was exhausted and was being scorched by the Persian summer. Not wanting to drag on the war, he decided to cut off the head of the snake and siege Ctesiphon, believing this would force Shapur into submission. As they got closer to the city, Julian's supply lines constantly fell under attack from raids. However, there was no sign of the Persian army after it fled from Myos-Malaka. Once they reached the city, they noticed that the moat surrounding the city had been drained. But more importantly, the city's defenders were standing outside the walls. Thousands of spearmen, war elephants, and Shapur's feared Persian cavalry named Islibalani. According to historian Amanius, who was there, the Persians were vast and numerous. On the walls, heavy archers rained down flaming arrows, and the Persian navy continuously hurled naphtha, pots filled with oil. After a bit of fighting, Rome seized the beaches, and legionaries began to rush out of their triremes. During their battle, Julian ran through the front lines, encouraging his men and reinforcing the points that were breaking. The ferocity of the Clibanarii was handicapped by their clad armor that they and their horses wore, burdening them to the sweltering heat. The Persian elephants too were being driven mad by the heat and running amok, crushing the Persians' own soldiers. Because of this, the entire enemy line began to fall into disarray, forcing them to run back into the city gates, with Rome winning the day. According to the historian Amanius, only 70 Romans lost their lives to the more than 2,000 Persians. Despite this, Julian's plan had already failed. He had no siege equipment to fight off the remaining defenders in the city, and Shapur was quickly closing in on Julian with an even bigger army to assist the city of Ctesiphon. Julian decided to consult the gods by burning sacrifices, however he received a bad omen. So, as a result, he made the fateful decision to incinerate his entire army and retreat through Persia on foot. To this day, historians still debate the reasoning for Julian burning down the Roman navy. While he gained additional men from the trireme's crew and prevented Persia from using it against him, he sacrificed a means of evacuation. Because his men were low on supplies, going through Persia could theoretically keep them alive because of foraging. On the other hand, however, it gave Shapur an advantage, as he could implement scorched earth tactics to slow down the Roman retreat. The common consensus among historians is that Julian was attempting to link back up with the Armenians to lure Shapur into a trap. Since he could not besiege Ctesiphon, he assumed defeating Shapur in a decisive battle was the only way to make him sue for peace. This, however, did not happen. The more that Julian's legions retreated, the greater that the risk of his men dying to raids increased. On top of that, it was now summer, and his men were dying of heat exhaustion. Near the city of Maranga, Julian repelled a large Sassanid attack, but it was not a decisive defeat. In June 363 near Samara, Julian's rearguard was ambushed by the Clibanarii. The legionaries quickly moved to reform their lines, and chaos quickly ensued. Julian had no time to put on his armor because he rushed to the front lines and encouraged his men. The Persians were repelled, but as they were routing, a spear grazed Julian's chest. By midnight, he was dead. According to the Rerum Gestorum by Amanius Arcelianus, Julian, careless of his own safety, shouting and raised his hands, tried to make it clear to his men that the enemy had fled in disorder, and to rouse them to a still more furious pursuit, rushed boldly into the fight. His guards, who had scattered in their alarm, were crying to him from all sides to get clear of the mass of fugitives. As dangerous as the fall of a badly built roof, when suddenly, no one knows whence, a cavalryman's spear grazed the skin of his arm, pierced his ribs, and lodged in the lower lobe of his liver. Amanius named the perpetrator a Persian cavalryman, but another historian argued against this. The historian Libanius claimed it was one of Julian's own men, a disgruntled Christian. However, he did not have first-hand accounts like Amanius, so this should be taken with a grain of salt. Regardless, Julian's death marked the end of the Sasanian campaign. One of his generals, Jovian, is declared emperor by the legionaries. Jovian is forced to agree to Shapur's humiliating terms in exchange for his men to retreat to the provinces with safe passage. Following Julian's campaign, Rome lost all influence in Mesopotamia. Another campaign into Persia would not be attempted by Rome for another 3 centuries, with them not even getting remotely close to Ctesiphon. With that, Julian's ambitions to be another Alexander the Great are snuffed out by this hand.